Welcome, and thank you for joining me today. Since there was flexibility as to the conference presentation format, I decided to prepare it in the style of a video essay because I strongly feel that these voices speak louder than I ever could, and because, as the old saying goes, pictures speak louder than words. Although that is debatable, I believe in this case the saying is correct. In this presentation, we will delve deeper into reproductive violence and human trafficking as a transnational concern through the lens of Ireland's mother and baby homes, industrial schools, and the Magdalene Laundries, as well as Spain's cases of stolen babies. My interest in this subject stems from my desire to study human rights law in the future, particularly women's rights, and it is part of a larger body of research I began as an undergraduate student. Domestic violence, a term that is unfortunately all too familiar on a global scale. Oxford Dictionary's definition of domestic violence is violent or aggressive behavior within the home, typically involving the violent abuse of a spouse or partner. But what about reproductive violence or reproductive coercion? These terms are for the most part less known and as such are often omitted from conversations that involve domestic violence. Reproductive violence is also a form of domestic abuse, and similarly it includes physical, psychological, emotional, financial, and spiritual mistreatment, just to name a few types, but the list is much more extensive. Many definitions of reproductive violence out there focus on romantic or sexual relationships and don't account for it on a social, cultural, institutional, national, and even transnational level. Human trafficking and reproductive violence have historically gone hand in hand. Author Margaret Atwood's well-known novel, The Handmaid's Tale, focuses on this premise. In a recent interview for Entertainment Weekly, Atwood said, "There is nothing in The Handmaid's Tale that did not happen somewhere." What transpired in 20th century Ireland came horrifyingly close to Atwood's Republic of Gilead, and although I cannot claim that this was Atwood's inspiration for the novel, it would not be outrageous to speculate it could have been. The United Nations defines human trafficking as the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of an individual for the purpose of slavery, forced labor, and exploitation. While everyone may fall prey of human trafficking, women and children have been historically more affected. According to the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, reproductive coercion is a form of domestic violence, where behavior concerning reproductive health is used to maintain power, control, and domination within a relationship, hidden behind the veil of magnanimity. The Roman Catholic Church was largely responsible for perpetuating reproductive violence transnationally for decades. While this is an important part of history, unfortunately, history is not all it is. Today, the ramifications of these actions are more latent than ever in the lives and experiences of survivors. Ireland's almost century-old history of socioeconomic marginalization is still haunting those affected today, specifically where gender, race, and class are concerned. Human rights violations span decades in a nation where secularism had taken place only partly, if at all, and the ideologies of the Catholic Church still reigned supreme. church-state arrangements founded upon conservative Roman Catholic roots, deeply intertwined with the foundation of the state, made it possible for institutions like mother and baby homes, industrial schools, and the Magdalene Laundries to exist. These institutions were presented as so-called refuges for the most vulnerable in society. They housed the stigmatized, the disempowered, the impoverished, the alienated, the silenced, most of which were young, pregnant, unwed women and what was considered to be their illegitimate children. Catherine Corless, a secluded Irish historian from Tuam, County Galway in Ireland, spent years compiling records concerning the deaths of children in one of the most famous mother and baby homes in the country. Corless's research spanned nearly 2 decades in which she faced pitfalls and challenges, first due to lack of funding, which she covered herself. Second, due to inaccessible public documents that appeared to have mysteriously gone missing over the years. Eventually, Corless's investigations rendered gruesome results. In 2015, she uncovered a mass grave of infant skeletons in a septic tank underneath the Bon Secours mother and baby home in Tuam. Her findings, which she obtained by comparing birth and death certificates to existing grave sites, caused sensation once made public. Media stations worldwide began broadcasting more stories of survivors of mother and baby homes, industrial schools, and the Magdalene Laundries, thus exposing Ireland's legacy of shame. There was increased pressure placed on the Roman Catholic Church, the Irish government, and even the United Nations to issue an apology for violating the survivors' human rights. A series of public apologies were issued by the Bon Secours sisters and the Irish state, culminating with the publication of the nearly 3,000-page final report of the Commission of Investigation into Mother and Baby Homes. The report was published by the Department of Children, Equality, Disability Integration, and Youth in 2020. Journalist Dan Barry from the New York Times interviewed Corless for his 2017 article, Ireland Wanted to Forget, but the dead don't always stay buried. He begins to tell her story from the time she was a child. In this long ago Irish morning, the young girl passes through a gauntlet of gray formed by high walls along the Dublin road that seemed to thwart sunshine. To her right runs the Parkmore racecourse, where hard-earned shillings are won or lost by a nose. And to her left, the mother and baby home, with glass shards embedded atop its stony enclosure. Behind this forbidding divide, nuns keep watch over unmarried mothers and their children, sinners, and their illegitimate spawn, it is said, the fallen. But young Catherine knows only that the children who live there seem to be a different species altogether. Sallow, sickly, segregated. Home babies, they're called. In the article, Corless further discusses the stigma surrounding unwed mothers in Ireland when she was growing up and the deep religious ties between church and state. Barry notes she kept digging, eventually finding another spreadsheet that listed the names, ages, and death dates of all the so-called illegitimate children who had died in the home during its 36-year existence. The sobering final tally, 796. For years, it was known that women and their children came mostly from low-income backgrounds. But less known was the fact that in a predominantly white country, inhabitants of these institutions were often of mixed race, adding, according to survivors, yet another layer of discrimination. Rosemary Adaser, a mixed-race woman and founder of the mixed-race Irish, survived both the industrial school and mother and baby home systems. In a recent episode of the Irish Times Women's podcast, Adaser, now in her 70s, was vocal about the trauma she experienced and expressed her anger and disappointment toward the recent report issued by the Irish government.
So on behalf of the government, the state and its citizens, I apologise for the profound generational wrong visited upon Irish mothers and their children who ended up in a mother and baby home or a county home. As the Commission says plainly, they should not have been there.
We failed, they say, to respect the inherent dignity of the women and children who came to the home. We failed to offer them the compassion that they so badly needed. We were part of the system in which they suffered hardship, loneliness and terrible hurt. We offer our profound apologies to all the women and children of St Mary's Mother and Baby Home, to their families and to the people of this country.
My feeling is that the report and the official political commentary coming from government are beginning to look like a sham, an insult and a whitewash.
I look at this report and I struggle for words, but I owe that to the survivors to find words to articulate, because you are actually placing abuse on abuse in the manner in which this whole subject has been dealt with.
The fact that they're saying there was no discrimination is just absolutely shocking, and yet within sections of the report that I've managed to scan, it's quite obvious that there are references to our colour and actually saying that they would be unlikely to adopt us. But yet the report said there was no discrimination.
Frequently rejected by their families and with no one by nuns. Such places were regarded as charitable, but in reality, they treated the mothers as fallen women in need of punishment.
I thought maybe we'd do 6 months there and then be let out, and that I would be allowed to go and see my baby. And when I went, first place they put me into the laundry. So I used to keep saying, when do you think I'll be going home, but when will I be going out? And one day one girl said to me, once you come here you won't be going out.
I only want to know if he's all right.
Perhaps these older nuns should help us with some of the details.
I don't think that's going to be possible.
Why not?
You're a journalist.
Dame Judi Dench captures the essence of the real Philomena: gracious, optimistic, strong. The action by the nuns of an Irish convent more than 50 years ago to take her son away shook her faith but did not destroy it.
And who could keep up a grudge for? I couldn't anyway. And especially with my religious teaching, I couldn't, because you're always taught to forgive. You know, turn the other cheek, maybe they say, but I gradually learned to do that.
Philomena discovered that her son Anthony was renamed Michael Hess, that in the 80s he was a lawyer for the Republican National Committee, and that he died of AIDS at the age of 43.
I tell you, it was like losing him twice.
Now, Philomena's goal is to help Irish women like her locate their lost children. She and her daughter Jane Liberton have started the Philomena Project, a campaign asking Irish authorities to open the files of thousands of children allegedly sold into adoption by the Irish Catholic Church.
They did say that they hadn't sold babies and that no money exchanged hands, but I know that people do have documents that say something else.
Liberton says thousands of babies were taken from their mothers.
I think there were about 2,000 children like Anthony that were adopted to the United States.
Beyond discrimination on the basis of race, some concerns from survivors, historians, and human rights lawyers and activists about the language of the report include references to the institutions as refuges and the failure to clearly define terms like forced. Furthermore, they claim the report falls short in recognizing and including the experiences of survivors, provides justifications, however subtle, for the actions of individuals involved, such as priests, nuns, social workers, and doctors, does not fully recognize church-state arrangements, implies responsibilities laid with families rather than with the state and church, provides no evidence of women being forced into homes despite decades of contradicting claims, and does not discuss the absence of written consent by the women to give their children up for adoption. Beyond these shortcomings, Caoilinn Hogan, author of Republic of Shame, Stories from Ireland's Institutions for Fallen Women, points to intrinsic contradictions in the language of the report, like those discussed by Rosemary Adaser. Hogan also points to reflections of dated legislative policies still in place, and the overall pervasiveness of institutional power in the language of the report. Attorney Moira Enright, who has written extensively on law and feminism, reproductive justice, and historical injustice, notes that the report's tone is overly formal and flawed in its methodology. In the executive summary of the report, it is stated their lives were blighted by pregnancies outside of marriage and the responses of the father of their child, their immediate families, and the wider community.
La Iglesia nunca fue inocente.
Me duele en cuanto a la Iglesia y que no reconozca lo que se hizo.
Pero hay fortunas de cientos de miles de euros y de millones de euros, ¿no? ¿Y dónde está ese dinero?
Todo esto estaba, por supuesto, adornado con una ideología nazi y que pretendía educar a todos estos niños en una nueva patria.
In their book Stolen Babies of Spain, published in 2020, authors Greg Rabidoux and Mara Lencina chronicle the trafficking of babies in Spain directly after the Spanish Civil War in the 1930s. Stolen Babies of Spain, the documentary, based on the book by the same name, was launched earlier this year, and I had the privilege of attending the premiere. The book contains over 300 interviews, many of which are featured in the documentary. While there are differences between the two, the parallels between the voices of Ireland and Spain's survivors of human trafficking are ghastly. Both Irish and Spanish women were affected by reproductive violence. And like in Ireland, church-state arrangements were prevalent in 20th century Spain, and paralleling Ireland once more. These arrangements included individuals in positions of power within the system. For example, priests, nuns, doctors, nurses, and social workers. When I recently attended the live premiere of the documentary, I asked authors Greg Rabidoux and Mara Lencina what their take was on what caused this situation in Spain. Rabidoux noted that it began with Franco Spain and its ideological similarities to Hitler's Nazi Germany, with a stronger influence of the Roman Catholic Church. However, as time went by, it also became a profit scheme, and babies were stolen and sold for decades. Though not the only heavy-handed player, the Roman Catholic Church's influence is clear transnationally. Ireland and Spain are only two examples. But survivors in Spain find themselves in many ways in more precarious circumstances. Embedded silence and prejudice are still institutionally pervasive in Spain, and to an extent socially as well, according to Rabidoux and Lencina. This made their work challenging and at times even dangerous. Like Corless in Ireland, they stumbled across many pitfalls when searching for documentation, many of which were supposedly lost in a flood, burned in a fire, or some other such natural disaster. Rabidoux and Lencina chronicled the stories of Spanish survivors who were stolen as babies as they search for their biological family and true origins, just like Ireland's survivors. Stolen Babies of Spain, both the book and documentary, feature surviving parents still searching for their stolen children that were sent away for illegal adoptions. Like the Irish people, Rabidoux and Lencina ask what is being done to combat these basic human rights violations. They point to ongoing trafficking of babies and children worldwide as not just a thing of the past. Rabidoux and Lencina spoke of survivors wanting justice. I asked, what is justice specifically to them? They replied, they are not so much concerned about bringing all of those who did them wrong to trial. They understand the difficulty in that. Their focus is not on monetary compensation or government apologies. By justice, they mean they want access to their documents. They want to use those documents to find their original identities, to possibly reunite with those they lost long ago before it is too late. That's what they mean by justice.